Is that better? All right, so we've talked about all kinds of adaptive problems, right? The last few weeks we talked about adaptive problems of your parents getting together, okay? We solved those adaptive problems, right? Remember we learned that, sort of just real quick summary, all women are gold diggers, and all men just want very young, attractive ladies. That's kind of that. Right? Makes sense. So, this week, though, we want to talk about the actual problems of parenting, right? Like once you have created offspring, what do you do with them, right? How do you invest resources in them? Why would you invest resources in them? If you've created more than one offspring, how do you decide which one of those offspring to devote resources to at any given moment, right? Because you can imagine these are serious problems that have to be solved. We are assuming, again, just to kind of remind you of this situation, that there are a limited number of resources, right? We're not thinking about a situation where there are unlimited resources. And in fact, there have been studies, I don't think we talked about this last few weeks, particularly with mating strategies. There are, boy, this is even worse. They give people money and they say, how much money would you spend on this trait or that trait for your partner, right, for your mate? And so then we're really putting a dollar value on something, aren't we? And that seems that seems tricky in some ways. And they would vary the amount of money that they would give individuals and vary the cost of those particular traits. And that's a way, if you've limited the amount of money someone has to spend on particular traits, you can see which traits they value the most. Right? If you just give them $1 million and every trait costs $1, well, they've purchased everything they want, right? I mean, they say, well, this person has all of these 1 million traits, and you're like, oh, well, that's great. That doesn't tell us anything, right? But if you give somebody $5 and they've got to divide that amongst some things, then Jason, they can really make a decision, right, about what's really important. It'll tell us something, we can quantify it. So keep in mind in these situations of parenting, we're thinking about limited resources, right? We're thinking about a lot of other situations as well. So let's talk about offspring first, right? So what do we know about offspring? We should really think about them as gene vessels, right? I know that's kind of like something, right? You can call all of your siblings useless gene vessels. That's a good insult. Right? But this is what your parents, they don't maybe consciously think of you this way, right? But offspring are a way to make sure that your genes are transmitted across generations, right? And so when you have offspring, if you have a child, they have 50% of your DNA, right? That's the way that slices, okay? And 50% of your DNA is identical to 50% of one of your parents' DNA, and 50% is identical to the 50% of the other parents' DNA, right? Does that make sense? So you get half of your DNA from each parent, which is half of their DNA, right? Okay. Does that make more sense? Okay. So because we're really thinking about trying to get the genes to move forward to future generations, right? This is a really, it's really important that we work on the survival and reproductive success of children, right? Just, you don't have to raise your hand, but if you want to, you can. How many of you have had pressure from your parents to have grandkids? Yeah, right, right. Some of us who are slightly older, Josh, are in that category, right? Eventually, my parents gave up. It's like not happening, and then they actually just started taking care of my best friend's kids. So it's like, took the pressure off me. That's fine in my book. So if you haven't experienced that, that means your parents think you're a loser. And no, if you haven't experienced that, you might at some point in the near future, right? Most of your parents are hopefully thinking, let's get them out of college first, and then we'll start working on the grandkids thing, right? Now I'm thinking something really interesting about why mothers seem to be more about pushing you to have offspring than fathers. That's kind of the stereotype anyway, right? And we could think about that at some point. There might be some reasons for that. So there we go. So we definitely want to make sure that your offspring, if you do have them, you want to make sure they survive. What's interesting, though, is that a lot of species don't do any parental care at all. You know, they kind of just do a drop and run, okay? And there are a number of species that do that. Why? I'm sure if you were all to make a phone call right now to your parents, they would tell you it was costly. It's costly. It's probably still costing them, right? At some point, and they probably still worry about you. They probably still think about all the things that that you're doing, and so parenting is costly, right? In order for any species to invest in parental care, it's got to outweigh the costs. The benefits have to outweigh the costs. Right? That's everything we've talked about, right? Why do we do anything? Because the benefits outweigh the costs, right? Why are you in college right now? Somebody convinced you, thankfully because it pays my salary, somebody convinced you that the benefits will outweigh the costs, right, Mary? So that's why you're here. So you're paying all of this money for a college education because you're hoping in the long run you're going to make more money than you spent on this deal, right? Or maybe not more money, but you're going to have the lifestyle, right? And you can quantify this in other ways, Josh. I don't have to have on my advisor hat right now. I can have on my realist hat. So this was actually, speaking of education, this was an issue a few years ago when there was sort of a flood of lawyers on the market, and it was difficult for new graduates from law school to get a job. There were a number of folks going into law school who decided against it. Law school admissions kind of went down, not because they were turning people down, but because there weren't as many applicants, because they weren't seeing the benefit to all the loans they were going to take out for the likelihood they were going to be able to get a high-paying job. They were going to law school and getting a JD, a Juris Doctorate, and essentially working as paralegals, something that they could have done with a much less costly, less time-intense degree. So I think that's rectified some at this point. But those are things that happen. Again, it's just costs and benefits, right? Parental care is pretty much a human universal. There aren't any known situations where there's a culture or a group of folks who just, drop their babies off on rocks and hope they make it, right? Now, there are individuals who might do that from time to time. Okay, so those are outlier situations, as profound as they are in the media or in our minds when they happen. Those are the outlier, right? Those are very much the outlier. I know a lot of you are probably dealing with or will deal with individuals who are coming in with mental health problems. Maybe they're child neglect or child abuse problems, right, Katie? So these are things that you might see in your professional practice. It's still the minority, right? Most of the time, parents are going to take care of their kids. That's how we got here. And mothers do tend to invest more than fathers. Again, that's the average. Why is that? Chandler, this is just a continuation of that investment. Every time we've talked about mothers and fathers, mothers have been investing more, and they're obliged to do more.
Paternity certainty, too.
Paternity certainty, absolutely. We're going to talk a lot about paternity certainty. I'm going to make sure all of you go home and start questioning who your fathers are. Krista, that's going to be fun, right? Call up your mom and go hey, look, I hate to ask, but are you sure? Now I almost feel bad. Almost. I have very little capacity to feel bad, Jason, but I almost feel bad if you had some uncertainty about who your father is, that I've called you out on that now. You've handled it well, so I'm going to assume you don't.
You'll never know.
You'll never know. Neither will he. So, Josh, it looks like you've read these slides. So, the last time something came out of my body, I was 100% certain it was mine. And that's because it came out of my body, right? And so usually when something comes out of your body, Jason, you know it's yours, right? And it's the same thing. Mothers are 100% sure they're genetically related to things that come out of their uterus. Okay? There's no doubt. it's still attached to you at some point, right? So you know, that belongs to me. That long tube I've been funneling nutrients through for the last 9 months, that ensures me that that's mine. Males, on the other hand, can never really be 100% certain that their offspring is theirs, right? Now, we have some advanced technologies today that are available to us. They're still not 100% perfect, but you know, you probably, with some certainty, assume that. But males are never quite certain that the offspring is theirs, okay? So because of that, males are not going to want to invest everything they have in that child. Why is that? Well, if that child is not theirs, they've wasted all those resources, right, Ashley? And their DNA didn't move forward. Okay, their DNA did not move forward to the next generation, and that's a waste. As I've said, the only thing worse than raising your own children is raising someone else's children. So please don't take me too seriously on that. But that's my take on it. Part of this is because of what we call mating opportunity costs, right? And so this is a hypothesis that says, basically, every minute that a father spends taking care of a child is a minute he couldn't spend having sex with someone else, right? And so if you think about that, right, when you invest your resources in this offspring, you're missing the opportunity to create more offspring, okay? And if the point, Jason, is to get more of your DNA in the next generation, that's costly, right? Now, here's the thing, though. Just because you're going to spend time, I don't know if anybody's been in this situation before, never happened to me. Just because you're going to spend time looking for someone to mate with doesn't mean you're always going to be successful. Mary got that one. Right, that one made sense to you. So what I'm saying is it's not a 100% chance that just because you've devoted some time to looking for someone to mate with that you're going to have that opportunity, right? So no one's wanting to join in on this, Josh. Nobody's wanting to say know exactly what you're talking about. I've been striking out a lot lately. Most people aren't even smiling, Krista. I don't know why either. Yeah. Reminds me of the time I did Psychology Jeopardy at the Tri-State Psychology Conference. The answer to one of the questions was erectile dysfunction. 5 teams of 5 people, 25 people sitting there like this. I was like, oh, the answer is erectile dysfunction. Nobody knows anything about that, do they? This is an awkward moment. Some of the faculty were laughing. I thought it was hilarious. Mostly students who didn't laugh. But it's missed mating opportunities, right? Now, if you're 100% certain that that child is yours, it's less important for you to try to mate with someone else because you've already created a gene vessel, right? And creating another gene vessel, do you want to abandon this gene vessel for another gene vessel? Well, Garrett, maybe sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, but that it raises the threshold, right? Okay, if you're 100% certain that that offspring is not yours, you're not going to invest anything into it, and you're going to try to find somebody else to mate with, okay? Because, you want to have that, you still want to have that gene vessel, all right? So again, those additional matings that you could have, the more you invest in the offspring that you are caring for, the less opportunity you're going to have for that. What about favoritism? Who loves favoritism? Anybody know you're the favorite in your family? Somebody's raising some hands. Well, that tells you something. Your parents have decided that you are more likely to have offspring than your siblings, and that the offspring you will have are going to be better. So there you go, right? It's too bad you don't want kids. Yeah. If you make that clear, you might not be the favorite any longer. Things will shift because, and they should, right? If you get to the point, according to sort of the thinking here is, if you're to the point where your ability or desire or likelihood of having offspring is reduced, your parents would want to invest fewer resources in you than in one of your siblings who would be more likely to pass their DNA on to the next generation, right? Does that make sense? Because again, we're assuming the whole point of this is to get DNA downstream somewhere, right? Now, there are a number of people choosing not to have children, like actively choosing not to have children. I think that's a much more common thing now than we've seen in the past. There's a very big reason for that. I'm not an art major. Again, Brooke, please. I apologize for this, but hopefully does that look like a birth control pack? Even after I've told you what it is, does it look like one? Almost, right? Looks like the sun. Well, they've got those little pills they punch out through the foil packs, right?
Like one of those windows on the door.
I think.
Mostly in like little square things now.
Oh, really? So one, I've never personally used one of these, either in the square or in the. I thought the last one I saw was like a clamshell thing. What do I know? Do they not come in clamshells? Nobody knows. So, right?
I mean, yeah.
Thank you.
Like little circle packs, little squares. They come in all.
I'll give you a +1 for that. Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. It's not going to do you any good, but I'll feel better about talking to you. So I think part of this is we have much more control over having offspring now, and when I say we, I mean women have much more control. And then for a brief period of time, they even had more control than they do now. But that's a whole side story there that we don't have to get into. Right, Krista? Control's leaving you every day. Sorry. I feel like, so here, I just have to say it, right? Like if I had a uterus, I feel like I should be able to do with it what I want. And if I want to put something in there or take something out, like if I want to rearrange and remodel, that's up to me, right? Nobody comes to my house and says you can't put your couch over here or throw out your chair. If I'm going to throw out my chair, I can just throw out my chair. So I don't know. That's my take on it. I called condoms spare tires the other day. Now I'm just calling a fetus a chair, but whatever. If it's yours, do with it what you want, right? That's my take on it. I also have this real logical conflict right there about something, but Krista, that's a whole separate conversation. And that probably does get too far off topic for me to talk about it in class. I just think, Josh, if your whole take on things is fewer regulations and control from a centralized government and more like personal choice, then I think the first place you get to choose is your privates, what you do with those. It just doesn't make any sense. You got to be one or the other, right? You either got to micromanage or just let people do whatever they want. You can't pick and choose. All right, so parental care. It's 3 things we want to think about. Is the offspring mine, right? Are the children really your own? Okay, we've talked some about that. What can those offspring do with your parental care? Right, this is important, okay? For every unit of parental care that you invest in one of your offspring, what can they convert that to? Right? How can they use that to create offspring of their own? How can they use that to survive to an age of reproductive maturity, right? So if you've got a couple 3-year-olds running around and you're going to invest some care in them, what's the, how much do you invest in them? What can they do with that care? What can they convert that into, right? Okay. And what are other resources that might be available, right? Or what else could you do with those resources? So we've talked about mating opportunities. What about investing in your sister's children? My sister's not going to have kids either, so I don't have to worry about that. How many of you have a sister that has kids? All right, Paul. So you could have your own kids. That's one thing you can do. Or you could take care of your sister's kids, right? So you've got some opportunities there to still get DNA that you have, because you should share some DNA with your sister, right? On average, you share 50% of your DNA with your sister, right? I mean, that's pretty good, right? And so if you take care of one of her kids, well, whoo-hoo, right? How much can you put into that kid to get it to reproduce? You don't have to put into your own kid to reproduce, right? So these are the. Krista's over there doing math. I don't know. These are the things that should come into play, right? And they do come into play. Okay. Let's think about that genetic relatedness, right? Okay. One of the best ways to do this is like stepfathers, stepmothers. We talked about this some before. Stepmothers and stepfathers don't have parental feelings for their stepchildren at the same rate as they do their biological children. I don't think that's a shock for anybody. Okay. I do think it's interesting that more stepfathers indicate that they have parental feelings than stepmothers. I think, Josh, this is a weird loophole here, because these folks are never quite certain who their offspring are. Toss of a coin. They'll feel like it's their kid or not half the time, and I think that's about the going rate, right? These people always know if that offspring is theirs, and if it's not, then it's going to be harder for them to to build up that feeling, which is really interesting. There have actually been a few communal societies out there, some small experiments where they've tried, like, hey, do what you want with whoever. When something falls out of that person, we'll all take care of it. And that's sort of an interesting approach, right? I mean, we're all, bright folks. We should all be able to work equally hard and get equal resources, right? And we should all take care of each other. It just sounds so wonderful, right? It's probably never going to work. I hate to be like this real pessimist, and it's never going to work because of the women. It's not going to be the men's fault. And Chris, I'll tell you where it's going to be the women's fault, is because things that come out of their bodies, they're not going to let other people take care of them, right? If you have spent all that time and those resources to develop something, and then it's out of you, you're going to hold on to that. And so what they found in these societies is that where they've tried this kind of setup, Michaela, is that the mothers are not really too keen on letting someone else really take care of their kids. And so they've really tried to spend more time and keep their kids with them and kind of break down that situation. And in fact, it's typically the women that overrule the men in these situations, even though the men are like, oh, let's do what we said we were going to do, and everybody just have a good time and work together. And the women are like, no, this is my kid. And so I think that number and those situations are tightly connected, and it's that genetic relatedness business. Chandler?
What about the age of the children? Is that the age of the children and the first one? Like, is that swayed if maybe it's that child's like?
Yeah. So I think in general I would anticipate that it's harder for you to feel parental feelings for older children. If you get married to someone and they've got a 16-year-old kid versus a 3-year-old. Do you know what I mean? I think that's going to be. I don't know that particular study controlled or looked for that, but that would be my gut feeling on it.
So is it the same for like adopted children?
Josh, you got any comments other than we don't know? Typically, they look at stepfather, stepmother. I think there are a few reasons for this. If you look at the data of these studies, folks are a little less open. We're a little less open about adoptions at that time than they are now. So Kelly, I don't really know. That's really a great question.
So if they like view them as like biological in like some sense, do you think like not like what I mean? Like you had like adopted an infant baby, you would like view that as your own?
Yeah, Chandler, you got a comment on this?
I mean, I would imagine like maybe the parents seeking adoption, seeking being a parent. If you're maybe you're seeking more.
I think you might be onto something there, Chandler, because I think with a stepmother, stepfather situation, sometimes it's, oh, you've got kids. Well, you've also got fill in the blank. I'll deal with the kids. I think for adoption, that's more of an active process. So I don't know, though. That's a really good question. It's a little bit of a sensitive question, I think, for some folks. But there's no reason you shouldn't ask it. And I mean, really, you ask it. I mean, you can design the study and do it yourself. You know, yeah, send out a survey and do it. Jason, you have a comment?
Yeah, I was kind of curious. You like, what was the difference between siblings, like their sibling having offspring, compared to like the genetic relatedness and having a stepfather? What would be like? How big is the difference? Like, because we're talking about.
Here's Hamilton over here saving 3 of his nephews and 2 of his first cousins. That's a joke not everybody got, Jason, but if you did, it was really pretty funny. What you're asking, I think, so let's wait a week. Next week, and one of the reasons I wanted I was going to try to talk about parents and kinship all in one week, and I realized there's actually some math next week. And I think, Jason, if you can remember that question and that line of thinking, next week we'll add some wrinkles to this, because I think you're on the right track. Now, doing this calculation might be tricky, but there is a point where, you know, if you had the opportunity to save 4 nephews or one of your own kids, mathematically speaking, with your DNA, you know, one of those might be more to your advantage than the other. That may or may not be the choice you make. You can create some really weird situations for people. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess I was more along the lines wondering, like, what would be the difference? Like, is there a significant percentage difference between stepfathers and stepmothers taking care of, like, offspring of the other person compared to having, per se, a brother or sister taking care of their siblings, nephew, or not nephew, their child? Like, how big would the difference be? Does that make sense?
I need a family tree.
Okay.
I think I'm lost.
So you have a stepfather and a mother of the child, right?
Gotcha.
Okay, so that's one family tree. Okay, now you have a single parent who's just the mom, right?
Okay.
And then you have her sibling has a brother, right? But he has no kids. So what would the difference between, like, so the brother's gonna take care of the child potentially, right?
Yeah.
What would the difference be between those 2 different family styles?
I think in that particular situation, the brother is going to be more invested because the child does have some DNA.
I was just curious, like, how big of a difference?
I don't know if anybody's looked at that particular comparison. I mean, that's
complicated math. Sorry.
Yeah. I would anticipate that anytime there's genetic relatedness, or Kelly, you might have to come up with a new term of artificial genetic relatedness. You know, if you're adopting someone actively, do you know what I mean? I don't know. It might be a whole new concept. But I think anytime there's some genetic relatedness, that's going to beat out non-genetic relatedness. Well,
I was just curious on if
I don't know.
I mean, there's some siblings are like, I don't want to take care of the kid, and they're just like, take it, I don't want it, because they're not have the experience.
Yeah, because I mean, there's like a million and one other factors into this too.
So over the course of 200,000 years, on average, that brothers were like when you tricked out that part is the answer that we're trying to get at. It's not like this one time. It's this iterated game that happens over 200,000 years. And so, yeah, the brother's gonna.
I think so. Yeah. Brother's gonna do it often enough so I can tell you, yeah. All right. Here's another one. Stepfather's more aggressive. Not a big deal. You're less likely to devote love and resources toward kids who are not biologically related to you. I mean, that's not too big of a deal, right? I mean, I think that's a shock. Not a real shock. These next couple slides, on the other hand, are really kind of interesting. And I think these are sort of fascinating things to think about, things that you might not even realize happen, but as soon as you hear it, you're like, oh yeah, that's absolutely true. So if you are a man, you have at least two sources. There's sort of two main sources of information about your sort of paternity certainty, right? So there are two pieces of information here. One of those is information about your partner's sexual fidelity, right? If you are with that person, 24/7 for, a year, and, they have a child, you're pretty certain it's yours, right? But that's not the case really for anybody. There's always times where there is some separation of the partners, right? And during that time, things can happen. And you're not entirely sure what those are. So now I'm making everybody paranoid, which is great. So that's why we have cell phone trackers and were you where you said you were going to be, right? So there's information about sexual fidelity, right? You can get that information from other people in your community, right? Just your partner's behavior while you're around. There's all kinds of things. You can, interrogate them with a hot lamp or whatever. I don't know, whatever you want to do. You've got your options and your methods. The other sort of information is the sort of physical and behavioral resemblance of the child to the father, right? Okay. If that child physically resembles the father's going to be more inclined to perceive that they are that they're more certain about the paternity, right? And they're definitely going to think that they are the father. What's really interesting about this is that they did a study a few years ago. I mean, this is really fascinating. So these researchers were interested in who do newborn babies look like, or who does the mother say the baby looks like, right? I mean, if something comes out of your body, you're going to say it definitely looks like me, right? Because it's mine. So that makes some sense, right, on some level. Also, if you are responsible for 50% of the DNA of something, to be honest, I mean, it's 50% of it should resemble you on average, right? If we're thinking about this. What's really interesting about this is about 80% of the time when the mother said or made a remark about who does the baby resemble, the newborn baby, 80% of the time she said it resembled the putative father, right? And only 20% of the time did she indicate that it looked like her. Now, if it was closer to a 50-50 split, that might be much closer to reality, right? And in fact, when they show people pictures of babies and they show them their parents and they say, and they're unrelated to them, and they can kind of indicate who they look like, you get a little closer to that, anticipated actual split, right? So why would a mother want to, 4 times as many times, say that a baby looked like the father than it looked like her? Anybody have any ideas about what advantage that might provide for anybody involved in the situation? Absolutely, right? Because what's the only thing worse than raising your own children? Raising someone else's, right? And if that baby's not yours, you're not going to invest anything into it, right? And so that mother has lost out any support she was getting, probably, from the father, and definitely any support that the offspring was going to get, right? And so if she can convince the father that, yes, you are 100% the father of this baby, then that male is going to be more likely to invest time and resources into the survival of that child. That makes sense, right? So now that you know this, how many of you have seen a baby or heard somebody talk about a baby, and you think about how many times they've indicated that it looks like the father, more so than the mother? Anybody? Yeah, right, Laura? I mean, that's reasonable. All over Facebook. And Facebook in this case can be trusted to back up this point we're trying to make. Because No other time can Facebook be trusted. But absolutely, right? That's really interesting. I mean, you should analyze Facebook comments on this. Increase the sample size. But yeah, all the time, every baby ever born looks like the father, right? And the reason for that is so the father doesn't abandon them. Makes sense, right? Josh, you got something percolating? Nothing good. Yeah, nothing good, right? Nothing good. Yeah, there's nothing good about this, right? Oh, man. I always think about these things like, what about identical twins? Like, if you're a guy and you've got an identical twin, you'd never know. Right? I mean, you'd never know if that offspring was yours or not.
Oh, yeah.
Kid would still have half your genes.
Huh?
Kid would still have half your genes.
And they're yours.
Paul, that was a rather advanced comment. It was a little devious, but it was a rather advanced comment. Now I'm wondering if Paul has an identical twin. He sends to class half the time. Do I have to yell spoiler alert if I say something about The Prestige at this point?
Oh, no.
Because that movie's been out forever, right? Okay. Did anybody see that movie? It's Batman and Wolverine in a magic show. That's a good description, right? Yeah. Kelly, you got a question?
Yeah, I was gonna ask, is this like a conscious thing or is it just like instinct?
I'm going to say it's an evolved psychological mechanism. How's that? Because I'm not going to say it's an instinct, although on some level you're going to ask me what's the difference, and I'm going to ramble around for 10 minutes and we're not going to learn anything. I mean, there are some differences, but whatever. We're not going to have to worry about it. I don't think it's conscious. I mean, I think sometimes it is conscious. I think there are times where the baby comes out and it doesn't look anything like the father, and you know you've kind of been a little busy and you shouldn't have been, and you're like, well, that other guy's definitely not going to give me any resources, but I better start talking about how much this baby looks like this guy who is paying my bills. So I'm not going to say that on rare instances isn't a conscious decision. I think for what's being captured here and for the overwhelming, slant on how this is how babies are talked about, it's an evolved mechanism. I don't think the mothers are necessarily aware. I don't think the mothers' families are necessarily aware of what's going on when they say these things. So I hear sort of from that study, here are some examples. The feels like you's kind of a weird one. I mean, right? I mean, it's like, it's a little strange. This baby feels just like you. Smooth and lumpy? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know that that's a compliment. That one jumped out at me. The other ones, looks like you, honestly looks like you. Yeah, honestly, he looks like you. There you go. Just to clear it up, right? Because you always throw that honestly. Honestly. Yeah, it does. It's sort of interesting. Interestingly, the mother's relatives were also they would also indicate that the baby looked like the father. That's kind of 66 to 34 sort of split on that. Not quite as much, but there's still, and I think, again, we're still talking about something, Kelly, that's not a conscious decision. I think, again, if you want your offspring's offspring to be successful, works better if there are two people contributing to the life of that child. And so if you can convince the father that he is the father, he's more likely to devote more resources. So there you go. So only have affairs with men who look like your husbands. That seems reasonable, right? I'm just trying to give you some good advice. Who wrote that down? No, nobody's gonna. Chandler may have.
She's only.
It's something though, right? I mean, there you go. Okay. I don't know. I found this particularly interesting. I found this to be a very, very interesting mechanism, right? And something that I think is a lot of these other mechanisms you can find in other species. You're going to find them in other species because other species are trying to solve the same problems. But I don't think in a lot of other species I don't know if you're going to find this. I don't know. I'm trying to think of like a chimpanzee mother talking to a chimpanzee father, but the fathers aren't really involved in so they're not invested. They don't really care who the father is. They're like,
That's when you say it feels like you. Chimpanzee.
just think, chimpanzees identify each other based on their butt wrinkles. That's a true story. So I'm just like mapping out the wrinkles. I don't know. Yeah. You guys should try this. Like, if any of you do have children, please don't. But if you do, tell the father, like, oh, the baby's got butt wrinkles just like you. See if that works. Anybody now, people say you look more like your father than your mother? No. Josh, we talked about that. Nobody else?
I look almost just like my father.
Really?
Yeah, at my age, it's almost, well, you can look at the childhood photos and it's uncanny.
That's interesting.
I think that the funniest thing is my father was adopted from Russia, and everyone says I look like my grandmother. They're not biologically related at all. That's my favorite thing.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm not there.
So I'll tell you a similar story. My brother's adopted,
Yeah.
And people tell me that we look alike.
You're like,
I'm like, sure, I guess. I mean, in that, like, he's a white guy with hair. But even my parents are, like my mom in particular is like, he looks just like you did, and I'm like, I guess. I mean, again, he's a white guy with hair. I mean, I that's a group I'm in. I don't know.
It's making me wonder what my mom said to my dad. Convinced that my dad had blonde hair and blue eyes. He looks just like you. Of course he did. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it was behaviors, because there are behavioral components. Look, he walks just like you, or look at the way he holds his head, or he's got the same smile. I don't know. I'm trying just to think of some other examples. Yeah, the only nice thing is, so my brother's 11 years younger than I am, but his hair's leaving a lot faster than mine is. So I just like to point that out every opportunity I can. Yeah, I know that's a fascinating one, isn't it? You look like your grandmother. Yeah.
I don't say anything. I'm like, yeah, we do, don't we? Okay.
Yeah. As I was telling Josh, my brother and I actually did those ancestry DNA things, and we even have some different. We have some different genetic heritage, even from different like regions on the planet, and so that even. I mean, if all of our DNA had been from like one small island, then you'd say, okay, well, probably all those people look similar, right? Because they're all breeding each other. I don't know. It's just interesting stories. Now everybody's going to go home and like try to hold up pictures of them next to their dads, right? I look like this guy. I don't know. Who knows? And then some of you probably, your fathers aren't really your fathers. That happens. Just throwing that out there. Here's kind of something interesting. Men actually have greater cortical activity than women when they're shown children's faces that resemble their own. So, There you go. Men are always trying to look for faces that look like theirs, so they'll know, like, I can take care of that. Kind of looks like me, probably is mine. Never going to know 100%. Now, Kelly, I've got a really interesting line of reasoning about things, and you're going to have to ask this. Now I'm wondering about fathers who adopt children of different races than their own, because their faces would not resemble their own as much as someone, maybe who might be, I don't know. Like, is I don't know. Ask that question too. Now I'm wondering, like, if there's, like, when it comes to, like, college, if they invest more or less.
It's got to be on the tail of the distribution, though. I mean,
Yeah.
does that happen on average?
Yeah, I don't know. So many interesting questions. Yeah. There you go. All right. What else do we want to know about this? We've already talked about this. Did we talk about this in this class? Maybe this was another class I talked about this. Basically, when it does come to college education, we can actually measure this in dollars and percent of college costs covered, right? And here's the short story. If your genetic mother is with your genetic father currently, you're going to get more money out of them to go to college than if your genetic father is with someone other than your genetic mother. However, if your genetic mother is currently with someone who's not your genetic father, you may be able to get some resources out of him if your genetic mother stays with him, on average. But, so, genetic children get about 15 grand more for college on average than stepchildren. Again, that's not probably surprising. And they get about 65% more of their college expenses paid for, which that's a way to sort of control for cost of college, right? Some people go to differently priced colleges, which is kind of interesting, right? If your father is not terribly certain you are his offspring, you're only 13% as likely to get money from him to go to college, and you're actually going to get about 28 grand less over it. I know, right? So if any of you are thinking, like, I'd like to get a little more money from my parents, start talking about how much you look like your father. To your father, right? So that he'll think, yeah, that's definitely my kid, and then he'll give you more money. So I'm trying to give you guys some good practical advice today, right? That and always have affairs with men who look like your husband. I think those are the two best pieces of advice I've given anybody. I mean, I think it's pretty good. What else do we need to know? Yeah, again, if the child's mother is still with that male, they're 3 times as likely to get money from that male for college. That's probably because, again, we talked about this. Men use parental care sometimes as a mating strategy, right? And they will, take care of kids that are their own or are not their own in order to maintain access to mating opportunities. Does that seem right? Seems reasonable. If your face looks more like your father's face, or at least he thinks so, you're probably going to be more emotionally close to that individual. Which, as we already said, their brains are more active. It's not something your father's consciously choosing to do, right? Like, oh, that kid doesn't look like me in the face, so I don't like it. But their brains are actually becoming more active when they see a face that resembles their own. And so that can obviously lead to some, behavioral and emotional sort of differences. So there you go. Now who's thinking about plastic surgery to look more like your father to try to get more money from them? Nobody. Nobody's thinking, why don't you think about these things? I mean, just like, how much is a nose job? Too much money. Like, really? Like, 3,000? But if you can get 28 grand more for college than someone who doesn't look like your father, and you can invest 3 grand, that's a 25 grand bonus. You just did the math, right? Right? Now you're thinking about this.
What if you like adopted one of his habits?
Yeah.
He really likes bowling. You're like, wow, Dad, I'm gonna begin bowling.
Maybe that's cheaper.
Out sometime.
Yeah. There you go, right? I don't know. Anybody's dad bowl? Paul, it's like, yeah, I'm thinking.
I mean, my dad plays chess, so you know, I could probably.
You could learn to play chess.
Yeah.
Just go in and start talking about like Gary Kasparov or something, and Bobby Fischer, and I don't know. I've got a replica chess set from 1974 when Bobby Fischer won the World Chess Championship in Iceland. It's in my office. It's in a bag. It's in a bag specifically to carry a chess game. I don't know why I needed a bag for my chess pieces, but I got one. So there you go, Paul. You can borrow it any time, but I want at least 10% of the extra funds you receive from your father for letting you borrow my chess set. If your mom, whatever she thinks about your face, it doesn't really matter. Mom's like, oh, that's a baby. It's mine. I'm as emotionally close to it as I'm going to be, whether it looks like me or not. So that's nice, right? At least one of your parents is unbiased by your physical appearance. What about child abuse? I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about child abuse. It's not a lot of fun. Here's the basic story, right? And you guys probably know this. Well, let's back up and let's be clear. Because in the book, you're going to read this. I know you've all read it. And that's why I'm just going to tell you. You read all of this stuff about child abuse, and then finally they say, child abuse is not an evolved psychological mechanism. They're pitching it to you kind of like it is. And it's a way to measure, like, whether or not step parents or love you or not, whatever. And then they finally say at the end, I think they kind of realize, like, oh, wait a minute, we didn't address that child abuse is not the norm. We didn't address that child abuse is not acceptable. We didn't address that it's not an evolved mechanism, and we're not saying that you should abuse children who are not genetically your own. We're simply saying that if you look at rates of child abuse, you see that it's more often in cases where one of the genetic parents is no longer in the household, and there's someone else there who's not genetically related, and that individual is more likely to abuse the child. Does that make sense to everybody? I think we can go through some real nuances here, but I don't know that we really need to. I think that's kind of the shakedown, right? Your genetic parents are less likely to kill you than your step parents. Okay? Does that make sense? And it should, right? Why would your genetic parents want to kill you? I mean, you could, trust me, you can be really irritating. But you're still a gene vessel for them, right? And even if you're really irritating, as long as you're fertile, they'll probably let you live. Right, Krista? Yep. So there you go. Not a big deal. Oh, and here you go. This is just like homicide rates, right? You've got both your natural parents, or being killed by a natural parent and then being killed by a step parent. Why would you, if you were, there might be several reasons why homicide rates are higher for younger children than older children, right? Anybody have some suggestions on that? Here's with a natural parent. Anybody? Babies get colic, right? That seems very specific.
Well, I was thinking of like because they'll just like scream and scream and scream, and then the parents or whoever just lose their mind because you can't get it to stop screaming, and then that.
Yeah. All right. So, yeah,
I think it might be easier to see like babies as not people.
Brooke, that was a little babies as not people.
Almost as like subhuman. Like they're
Miriam,
not
this isn't going in the
like-
right direction, is it? I was hoping someone would say like babies take up more resources.
Oh.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping for.
I was saying like they're not even really that intellectually developed, emotionally developed, so it's kind of like, you know.
Hey, Paul, how about you just say babies take up more resources?
Okay.
And so if you're a step parent in particular, right? I mean, this is something we see in gorillas. If a male gorilla takes over a territory, that male gorilla will kill any of the nursing infants, right? That'll kickstart the female gorillas back into estrus, so they're going to be fertile again, so he can mate with them and create offspring of his own. You guys are a little dark sometimes, but it's okay. It's all right. Those are good answers. Yeah. I think that's... Chandler, I never can tell if you have a question or if you're just stretching. It's like a double question. Let's see. What else do we want to think about? Women do actually reduce their risk-taking behavior if they have a baby with them in the laboratory. Men don't seem to do that. They're like, oh, there's a baby. Well, I bet I can jump over that anyway. Women, on the other hand, will be a little bit more careful, even if the baby's not their own. Just put a random baby in there. They'll reduce their risk-taking behavior. I know, right? Which is probably good, right? I mean, women seem to have more evolved mechanisms to actually make sure their offspring survive. They're going to be more directly involved in taking care of those offspring, and they're going to be more certain that the offspring is theirs. So it's going to be, there are going to be some stronger forces there on those mechanisms, right? Women are also better at decoding negative expressions in babies' faces, which is kind of interesting. What about men, huh? I mean, we've kind of pitched this whole story that like women are really invested in their kids and men are really invested in making more kids. But men do, in every human culture that has existed so far as we're aware, men have invested a lot of time and energy into their offspring. That's how we've all made it here on average, right? Is over time, men have invested a lot into parental offspring or parental care, right? Which makes some sense. So there you go. I don't want to pitch the story like, men are just trying to get out of taking care of kids. They're not. They just want to make sure that the kid's actually their own before they'll take care of it. So what are some ways that you could ensure that you're going to get resources from the kid's father? Make sure that you've increased their paternity certainty, right? So a really easy way to increase paternity certainty is not have affairs with men. Either ones that look like or do not look like your husband. And try to be clear about that, right? So there you go. Again, I'm not advocating, Mary, any particular changes in anyone's behavior or in any societal shift. I'm simply saying the more certain a male is that the offspring is theirs, the more resources they'll devote to it. Up to and including quite a lot, right? I know, right? This is a tough one. But here we go. So, yeah. Again, parents will invest in a child if they can see that that child will take that parental care and turn it into some reproductive success, right? On average, okay? Now, because let's think about the reverse of this situation. If parents only invested resources in offspring that were not able to reproduce, how long would our species have existed? Not very long, right? Because if you put all of your money behind like the continuation of our species, and you put all of those resources behind people who aren't going to have offspring, we're not going to have a species anymore, right? Does that make sense? So there are evolved mechanisms for parents to determine if that child can take that parental care and convert that into some reproductive success, right? Now, this is not saying, again, that neglect or abuse is an evolved mechanism. They're simply using this as a proxy to kind of make their point, right? So there are a higher rate of cases of children who have some sort of congenital abnormality being abused or neglected by their biological parents, okay? Does that make sense? I mean, it's not a real uplifting point, but it's not a real complicated point either, right? All right. What about maternal care? There is this sort of healthy baby hypothesis, right? Basically, mothers who don't have a lot of resources. Again, we have to sort of ask people who are short on resources, right? Asking, a billionaire which child they cared for more, that you don't really get an answer there, right? But asking people who have very, very limited resources, right? Because they're going to be more likely to put those resources where they can make the biggest difference, because they have a limited number of resources. If you have unlimited resources, you can put those anywhere that you want, right? And you can sort of invest, in whatever. You think about these. You could think about. I think about. You think about these billionaires like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, Richard Branson. They invest in all of these sort of ridiculous things, right? Like who shoots a car into space, right? Why? Now, for your average investor, that's not going to be. You're not going to invest in the company that shoots cars into space. I mean, that seems stupid, right? Why would you do that? Because you have limited resources. You're going to invest that into a company that's going to get you a return on your investment, right? So you're going to put your money into a company that sort of makes some profit on there, right? Because you have limited resources. You have unlimited resources, like those guys I listed and a few others. You can put your money into whatever you want. You can shoot things into space, whatever that is. It's your business, right? It doesn't matter, because you have other funds to invest in the other things you're doing to continue your sort of support. So you can invest in projects that are going to turn into more money for you, and you can invest in projects that are going to be a total waste of your money, because you have enough resources to do that, right? Does that make sense? Right, Jason? When we're billionaires, what are we going to shoot into space? You don't know. No. Probably our parents when we're done with this conversation, right? So there you go. So if mothers, with lacking, they don't have a lot of resources, they actually tend to invest more in infants who were healthier when they were born, right? They'll invest less in prematurely born infants. Babies who are born prematurely, they have some health problems. They need more resources. They need more investment. So you have to put more into them to get them to that point where they could have reproductive success than an infant who was born, at the appropriate time. You don't have to put as much in, comparatively speaking, to get them to that point of reproductive success. Does that make sense? But if you've got plenty of resources, you'll put more money into those high-risk infants. Why? That healthy infant's already where it needs to be, so you don't have to. Adding extra to that is not going to get you an extra benefit, right? Just continuing to let that child kind of do what it does. Investing in that child that's a little bit behind to get them caught up, that's going to give you more bang for your buck, right? So if you can take that child that's born at the normal time, every unit of investment is going to get you, let's say your normal parental investment amount's going to get you 2 offspring. And then if you added those extra resources into that you would invest in the other child, gets you a third grandchild. Okay, so you got 3 grandkids out of that deal. Now, with that low-risk infant, right, you leave it alone, you do the normal business, you get your 2 kids, your 2 offspring. With the premature baby, right, if you invest in it, what you would have invested over here, but maybe it gets you 2 kids, right? If you can get it to where you get 2 kids and you've got 4 offspring, 4 grandkids, and you've kind of, you picked up a bonus there, it's worth more than it would be to invest that into something. So that's kind of like at finals, right? When it comes time for finals and you're sitting in this class and you're looking at your other classes and you've got you've got a 75 in this class, for example, right? But you've got an 88 in another class. You've got limited resources, right? Okay, you only have so much time. Which class are you going to spend studying the most? If you're smart about it, the class where you've got the 88, because you can turn that 88 into an A, right? You can't turn that 75 probably even into a B because you're too far away. Let's say it's a 73. Let's drop you down a little more, right? So you would invest more in that class. Now, you've graduated, you're out, you're on your own, you're wanting to learn a new skill, you're wanting to learn a new, whatever it is, right? And you're not very good at something. You'll invest more time and money into that. You've got an unlimited amount of resources. You've got unlimited amount of time. We're not crunching you down on finals, right? So you'll spend more time, learning fly fishing, which you're not very good at, than you will playing tennis, which let's say you're really good at tennis, right? So you'll pay for fly fishing lessons. Is that a thing? I don't know. You'll read books about tying flies, and you'll get more advanced reels. And if you're pretty good at tennis, you're not going to buy a $300 tennis racket. You might buy the $150 tennis racket because you're pretty good as it is. That extra $150 isn't going to help you as much there as getting some better flies would for your fly fishing. Right? Does that make sense? So there you go. Babies are just like fly fishing and tennis in your final exams. All right. Let's see, what do we want to think about killing kids? Most of this, I don't really want to talk about the other thing. Most of this is non-relatives will kill a kid at just about any age. In fact, non-relatives kill teenagers at a higher rate than any other age category. Relatives, on the other hand, are more likely to kill younger kids. As you reach a teenager, what's something you can do as a teenager that you couldn't do when you were 4? Another teenager. So you can, there you go, Tiffany. You can have offspring when you're a teenager, right? You can't when you're 4. So your reproductive value when you're 16, 17, 18 years old is much higher than it was when you were 5, 6, 7, or 8, right? Or even 2 or 3. If you want to go back, if you look at kind of exponentially changes there, right? So reproductive value. That's important. I don't want to talk about the Trivers-Willard hypothesis, sons versus daughters. This is a very complicated and confusing thing, and the evidence on this isn't, it goes both ways. There's not a clear-cut answer on this. It's something about, would you invest more in sons or daughters depending on whether or not you have more or less resources, or the parents are healthy or unhealthy. It's a very complicated thing to test. It's very, anyway, we don't really have evidence one way or the other. What about women? Let's see. If you want to think about the age of women and killing infants, younger women are more likely to kill infants. There's like a weird little hike up here at the end. That's, Krista, you always look surprised. Okay, that's okay. You look like, what is he going to say about, women over 35 killing babies? You're excited about it. There's some reason that might happen. Part of this is because there's only like one example out here, so it looks a little weird. So I would ignore that mostly. Okay, younger women are more likely to kill their infants than older women. What can younger women do more of than older women? Yeah, they can reproduce, right? Yeah. Well, which is sort of what you said, but the way Ashley put it was a lot nicer. So they can, in fact, you might argue older women could have more sex without consequences, but that's sort of a separate conversation. So younger women, you know, you have a baby and you're like, well, I don't know. That one's okay, but I think I can do better. So, you know, you can get rid of that and try again, right? And you're like, well, I know all the parts work now. So if I'm going to get, I can maybe upgrade, get a better partner, because I learned a few things. And let's see what happens, right? But as an older woman, you know, let's say you're 30 and you have a baby, you're like, this is my last shot. I got to make this thing work one way or the other. And I'm not going to be able to create another child, so whatever gene vessel I have at this point is the one I'm going to have to try to get to reproduce. Now I'm wondering, Josh, if at the time of birth, if younger mothers, when their offspring get older, are more or less likely to guilt them into having grandkids than older women. You know, like if a woman has her first child when she's 30, but then again, people who wait until they're 30 to have kids, it might be a different group. They might be waiting for different reasons. They may not care about having grandkids. I don't know. That'd be interesting to know, wouldn't it? I'm just curious. Who's going to do that study for me? Oh, nobody. Why aren't you interested in these things that Jake?
Can you possibly relate this to financial stability? Because I'm like looking at the age, not like inferring anything, but like looking at the age, it follows like a college age for starting out, getting like an entry-level job.
Certainly, absolutely. So at this point, limited resources. Most people at 19 have limited resources. Whatever situation you're in, limited resources to invest in a child, right? By the time you're 30, you typically have more resources, right? And so you're absolutely right. I think the threshold for killing an infant is different when you're 19 than when you're 30. And the reason for that, I think, does partly relate to resources. It partly relates to your opportunity to have other offspring. At 19, you don't have a lot of resources. Your resources, if you had unlimited resources at 19, you probably wouldn't kill your offspring. You just have another one later, right? Like, let's say you were a billionaire's kid and you had a baby when you were 19. You're probably not going to kill it. I mean, you know, because you're going to be able to take care of that child, and you're going to be able to attract another mate at some other point and have other offspring that, you know, may be better, may not be better. It kind of depends, right, on the situation. When you're 30 and you've got more resources, you know, you're dealing with a similar situation. So, yeah, I think some of it's related to resources as well, Jason. Okay.
Is it possible they're just, like, the younger people are just killing them on accident?
That's actually a really good question. I think this only includes homicides. I think this data only includes homicides. I don't think it includes accidental births or accidental deaths. And in fact, yeah, it is only homicides. In fact, including only homicides would probably underreport, because some of the accidental deaths could in fact be homicides at any of these age groups. But you would think that would be more likely again at the younger age groups. But yeah, there could be, I think if you were to plot accidental deaths, you would see a similar curve. But there would be different mechanisms there. I think some of that would be resource related. I think some of that would be in terms of resource financial and also sort of educational and support structures.
I was just thinking, like, I wonder if anyone's done a similar study on abortion rates. Because I bet they would almost mirror like the same statistics.
You know, that's not something that I have. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have that data available, but that is an interesting question. I think the problem with that, there's a small problem with that. And there are a lot of problems with that, really. One of the problems is the availability of abortion has like safe abortions has been a relatively recent sort of development. That's not to say that there weren't ways that over the course of our species, people have intentionally ended pregnancies other ways. I mean, there are a number of ways you can do this. I'm not recommending or advocating any of those. They're not typically safe. But I don't know. I think that so that Paul creates an issue. The other issue is the availability of birth control we already talked about, right? Throwing a wrench into some of these sort of mechanisms. What do we call that? Evolutionary mismatch, right? So I think there are some recent things when it comes to reproducing and creating offspring that might be interesting to ask questions, but I don't know what the results would be. I mean, that's like it would be hard for me to predict. Maybe somebody else could do a better job predicting. This is like age and marital status. Again, there's like that one weird situation for that married woman over 35 that we can sort of ignore. Unwed mothers are much more likely to kill their infants than mothers who are married. Again, that's a resource availability. If you're married to someone, you're probably, you're actually legally bound to getting some resources from them, right? So there you go, right? That's one reason to get married. Nobody liked that idea. Also, you get, I think there's a tax break for getting married, right? Do you get a better tax rate if you're married? You might know. I mean, I should know, but I think there is, which is a little unfair, but whatever. Parental effort and mating effort, we already talked about this. Basically, men benefit more by gaining sexual access to additional mates. Women don't. I mean, once you're pregnant, you're pregnant. Continuing to have sex with multiple men doesn't make you more pregnant. It's an all or none sort of situation. You're either pregnant or you're not, and that's kind of it. And so you don't really get any benefit from continuing to try to mate. Men, on the other hand, can once they've impregnated one woman, they can impregnate others. What about parent offspring conflict? Right. Basically, you as the offspring want all of the resources your parents have to offer, right? Why not? You deserve it, right? You're the good child. You never gave them any trouble. You're willing to take care of them when they get old, or at least you're going to say so now, so you can get all their money, right? So you're willing to do those things. But your parents, again, they want to distribute. They want a diversified portfolio, right? They don't want to put all their eggs, pun intended, in one basket. They would like to have their eggs in multiple baskets, right? Because those multiple baskets can produce offspring as well, right? And that's kind of the option so that they have there. So they want to try to distribute resources accordingly, right? And they will do that. Again, we talked a little bit, Jason, about high risk, low risk, high resource, low resource situations, but they will typically distribute resources amongst all their offspring. Now that can change from time to time as the reproductive value of those offspring varies, right? Now I'm wondering if you should call your parents up sometime and go like, hey, I'm fertile right now, you got $20? How many of your parents would hang up on you? Yeah. I don't know. I think about those things sometimes.
I think they'd just be really confused. Like, why the hell are you telling me this?
I wanted $20. I don't know. Now I'm thinking if there's a way you could subtle. So now I'm thinking, is Jason?
I just had to build on this one. What if you like a female went to their mom or father and were like, I just had sex. I need a pregnancy test. Can I see $20? What would the parents be thinking? Oh, could we have a child, like a granddaughter or a grandson?
I don't know, Jason. That's not where I was going. I was thinking if you could like subtly indicate to your parents that you were fertile, and then see if they would allocate more resources to you without knowing it.
So like maybe if you're female, like increasing the pitch of your voice a little bit.
Paul, that's not a horrible idea. Sometimes I don't know what's coming out of you, but that's actually a very subtle way. Yeah, if you were to talk in a slightly higher voice, maybe, I don't know, because your estrogen levels. Huh. So half of you need to call your parents and try to, the females, try to talk in a very, very deep voice. And the other half of you, let's try to talk in a high-pitched voice. Everybody ask for $20, and let's
Design this differently.
let's design this differently.
There are tracking apps. And then you just ask during that time in the cycle versus not in the cycle.
Yeah. That way you don't even have to bother. The subtle signals you're sending are the subtle signals you're sending everybody, and any changes would be natural fluctuations. You're absolutely right. Although I liked the idea of everyone trying to call and change the tone of their voice. I thought that was much more fun. They really have tracking apps? Because I thought you could just go like, well, let me count a few days.
They do have apps.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Josh is out here and he's like, yeah, they've got apps, and he's like, wait a minute, let me ask somebody. Yeah, I mean, I'm not currently tracking anyone's menstrual cycle, just in case you're curious. But I had just assumed like, hey, I had my period. How many days until?
Right.
You could just like circle it on a calendar, but maybe there's a.
I don't think everything's exactly a 28-day cycle.
It's not. It's not. So there are body temperature fluctuations and hormone fluctuations and things like that. Now that's a study. That's a study right there. Now, how many of you are thinking like, I actually need a little money from my parents, but I know what's coming around in a few days. Based on some quick math I just did, I might get a few more dollars if I wait.
Don't have enough cash for a nose job.
yeah, that nose job for $3,000, you know, is going to get you $25,000 extra for college. That's it's worthwhile. The costs are less than the benefits on that, right? So you'll do it. All right, there you go. Not a big deal. Basically, I don't know, short story here. The fetus is a parasite trying to take all the resources from the mother. The fetus has has a greater stake in itself than the mother's future children. So while you're in that uterus, you don't care what you do to it. Beat it up, hammer on the walls, you know, it doesn't really matter. You're going to try to take all the resources out of that you can. You don't care if somebody can use it again, right? It's good for you. Who cares what happens next? You want all the resources. In fact, I think as a child, you'd want to kind of make it a one and done situation, right? If you could, if you were in there growing as a fetus and you had the choice, like, you know, I could just shut this thing down when I leave and never get it started back up again. Make sure I get all my parents' resources. Somebody disagreed with that. Where did that come from?
That was probably my face.
I heard an audible.
I mean, technically, siblings share half your genes.
They do. They do.
Why wouldn't you want more of them out there?
I guess. I mean, if they waited until, I don't know. I always wonder what's the, like, if we asked people, what's the ideal age gap between you and your siblings? Like if we were to ask people, that'd be interesting, right? Because that might tell you something like, how old do I want to be before resources get diverted to another offspring? I don't know. I think that's an interesting question. And nobody has to, like, change their voice up or down. I think the point of this class is to get you to think about things in a different way than you ever have before. Is there anybody who's in that category now? I hope so. If not, I've got, like 6 more weeks, so. I don't know, is this 5?
Minus Thanksgiving.
5 weeks.
Also minus today, but fine. It's depressing.
Oh, that's awful. I'm sorry. We talked about this. I'm really just disappointed because the semester is not as long as it should be.